VR is typically considered a rather expensive hobby. I mean, you need a decently powerful PC, and that can easily be several $100s or more, and something of that price is still going to struggle with a lot of experiences. Then, on top of that, you need the headset itself, which is another sizable investment. And certain options can cost more than some people's entire PCs. But what about the budget area? The people who might only have a couple hundred around that of a console or so to spend. Well, that's where this heavily modified little lad comes in. The Oculus Quest 2. The Quest 2 was explosively popular since its release, and it is the HMD that many would say brought good VR to the masses, for better or worse. The formerly $300 headset, now $400, easily has the largest market share compared to everyone. Even when just talking PCVR numbers, the Quest 2 is responsible for over 40% of registered headsets on Steam, more than 2 times the second place, the Valve Index. And that's not even considering how many people use this solely for standalone purposes, because unlike most headsets, this thing can play games without even being connected to a PC. However, as the saying goes, you get what you pay for, and this is a $400 headset. So does that mean you have to make a lot of compromises versus the costlier options? Yes. Yes, it most certainly does. However, despite being cheap and making sacrifices in some places, the Quest 2 actually beats its much more expensive competition in select areas. Most notably that being the freedom of wireless. Like this cable here right here? You don't need that on this boy. So are the areas it does well worth the trade-offs of some of its weaker spots? Well, that's what we're going to be taking a look at today.
So, let's begin with the positives of the Quest 2 so nobody can accuse me of being excessively negative later. Starting with the most obvious pro of the Quest 2, and the thing that makes people buy it as a primarily PCVR headset, is the freedom of wireless. On release, the Quest 2 was virtually unchallenged in this niche, as you had either its older brother and more limited Quest 1, or you had the HTC Vive models with a wireless adapter that cost as much as the bloody Quest 2 did, or even more in some cases, on top of the already expensive Lighthouse ecosystem. However, by now the number of wireless-capable HMDs or adapters either out or coming soon-ish is significantly higher than it was in 2020. So just look at this brief chart listing everything that's either currently available or will be in the first half of the year. Apologies if I miss anything, there are a lot of headsets getting announced and or coming out lately. So yeah, you see that? There is quite a bit of options there to choose from now. One might think that wireless isn't that much of a killer feature because of this, right? Well, note the price on the majority of these. Most of the options to get a complete kit, because remember the Nofio and HTC adapters go with existing sets, which cost a decent chunk of money, while the Pimax options can do wireless, but will need an add-on to do full and uncompressed res, and are a whole order of magnitude costlier even without that. As there are enthusiast options coming up, I wager most people looking at the Quest 2 for the wireless potential are on a bit of a budget and want to get their feet wet in VR. After all, the fact that it was so cheap is part of why it blew up so much. So let's be budget-minded and knock off anything over 2 times the Quest 2's price, that being $800, for a full kit and go with only new options, since the used market can vary wildly. The list suddenly gets a lot smaller. We just knocked off like 2/3 of the options in one go by doing that. And to narrow things down even further, the Pico 3 and 4 aren't even officially available in some countries. So if you're in the US, like me, then they aren't an easy option if you don't want to import or have concerns about getting support, despite the fact they're competitive on both price and features. So for a lot of people, if you want wireless but on our budget, you've really only got 2 options, and one of them isn't even released at the time of this video, so it's an unproven, if interesting and coming soon, looking product that could either smash the Quest 2 with its promised feature set and papers, or it's going to crash hard next to it and end up overpromising and delivering, trying to do everything at once. We'll just have to see what happens. But is the wireless good? Well, wireless itself is amazingly freeing. No need to worry about a cable, being able to spin around and move how you want. It's pretty great, and I can see why some people place such a gigantic importance on it. On the treadmill here, wireless means that I can pretty much forget about using the thumbsticks to turn near entirely. In fact, I'm so used to using the thumbsticks to turn, it sort of took a little getting used to check that reflex when I need to turn. Even the best pulley solutions can seriously help, but no matter what some may say, they will still always fall short of true wireless potential. Especially if you have a low ceiling, like me. Seriously, I've got maybe 1.5 feet max above my head. I cannot do overhead swings. I've tried many pulley setups from the Kiwis, VR wire, and then sort of an improvised solution, with and without a treadmill. The best ones could let me do a full 2 to 3 turns before I really felt like I had to entangle my cord. That's not bad, and I need to worry about the cable far less, or sometimes can put it out of my mind for a bit. It might not even be a problem in shorter sessions. However, there is always something at the back of my mind keeping in mind how much I'm turning I've done, or I feel compelled to use something like turn signal to monitor it. In longer play sessions, I simply cannot ignore the cable like I could for wireless. If you are in a small play space without too much move to room though, then perhaps you're not going to get as big of a benefit from wireless. But if you're in a large space in particular, or on something like, say, the Catwalk C, oh, it's great. And even without a treadmill, you could do a bunch of cool things like rolling around or wildly swinging your hands overhead without worrying about snagging your hands on the damn cable. And I do look forward to when it becomes more standard, as seems to be the case as we move on. And for some people, there is a good reason why wireless is their make or break decision on buying a headset. However, there is a reason we either don't have wireless on many high-res HMDs yet, or they require expensive adapters. Wireless has some of its own limitations, most notably those being bandwidth is far more limited compared to a cable. DisplayPort 1.4a has literally like a whole order of magnitude more bandwidth than the few hundred megabytes per second max on the Quest 2 does. Driving the 1920 by 1832 per eye resolution before barrel distortion supersampling at 90 Hz or more is a lot to push through Wi-Fi 6. And this sometimes impacts the visuals, but I will cover this in more depth during the clarity section. The other one I've seen people bring up is latency, which I haven't really noticed in meaningful capacity. Granted, I have a decent Wi-Fi 6 router running on a wired connection to my PC. Yes, wireless technically does have latency, and if you're doing super twitchy stuff, like say Pavlov or multiplayer shooters, there have been moments where I felt it a bit, but the majority of the time, I don't think most people are going to notice it that badly. The latency isn't that bad, provided you have a good router and local network. Side note, if you aren't able to use Airlink or find performance port, you can try virtual desktop. Some people get better results with one or the other. Now, in a similar vein to wireless, let's look at one of the other main selling points: standalone and exclusives. The Quest 2 is capable of running games in standalone mode. No powerful PC needed, which means that the people who want to try VR but are on a more serious budget can give it a go on the cheap, and many people get the Quest 2 to play it exclusively in standalone, no PC. And to the Quest 2's credit, it does have a pretty sizable selection of titles at this point. From gaming-focused ones that provide a variety of experiences, like say Contractors, Beat Saber, Saints and Sinners, alongside many more, to those more like experiences and exploration, such as say Wander, letting you explore Google Street View, to even exercise focus like say Supernatural. Among these, the Quest 2 even has some exclusive titles, with the biggest one obviously being Resident Evil 4 here. And that definitely made some people a bit mad, me included. There's also a VR port of GTA San Andreas coming up at some point too. If you want to play these specific versions of the game, then you need the Quest 2, much like you need a specific console for their exclusives. As of right now, there is no ability to emulate or play Quest 2 standalone titles on other systems. No Revive does not count because that is only for versions which have a PC port. You cannot play Quest 2 standalone on it. However, it goes without saying that the experience on a mobile processor is a significant downgrade when compared to even a mid-level gaming PC, let alone a top-end one like I have. I don't have many standalone games to speak of to do a comparison, but let's take a quick look at one of the few I do have. Something like Zero Caliber with a quick side-by-side comparison here. And this is using the recently updated PC version running on all max settings, which still has had some bits questified, much to the complaint of the PC community. And then the standalone Quest 2 version. I'm not sure how well it's going to show up with the YouTube compression, but well, it's quite a difference to look at. The textures alone are just a world better on the PC version. And there are a lot more things going on with it as well. There are still some games which actually look surprisingly decent, considering the limitations at work here, such as RE4. But more often than not, most games look straight out of the GameCube or even PlayStation 1 era. Better than no VR, and there is a convenience factor, but I pretty much never use this feature outside of Leon's game. Furthermore, being standalone does come with its own title limitations. Yes, many games are being ported to the Quest 2 or even using it as a base due to being the most popular HMD, as much as that causes problems for PCVR ports. There are still notable titles you cannot play on the Quest 2 since it is simply too weak to handle them and nobody's bothered porting them, even discounting modding. Notable examples include things like, say, Half-Life Alyx. So for those on a budget, the standalone feature can be pretty useful and still provide a variety of experiences. Some you cannot get on PCVR. Yes. Yet PCVR also has its own notable exclusives if you intend to use the Quest 2 for only standalone play, and you should temper your graphical expectations compared to whatever PC footage you may see online. So, with the main selling points of the Quest 2, besides the price it's kind of deceptive, but we'll get to that later, out of the way, I'm just going to briefly touch on performance here. With respect to performance, the Quest 2 can be decently demanding with its resolution. If you wish to see more, I did a dedicated video running the Quest 2 off a mobile 3080 and 10 different VR games, and it actually did hold up pretty well though. You can check it out here or in the description if you wish to get an idea of the performance demands of the Quest 2. With that out of the way, let's check out the tracking controllers. Honestly, tracking is fine, and I've been showcasing it all throughout this gameplay on screen. I know this is probably going to feel like an unpopular opinion, but I honestly think Lighthouse tracking is overrated for the majority of titles, and the Quest 2 controllers and tracking will work just fine in most cases. There's been like maybe 1 or 2 times where I've been playing things on the Quest 2 and felt like I had to consciously keep tracking limitations in mind or felt hurt by them. Even with all my over 1,500 hours in VR, and most of it has been spent on Lighthouse controllers, there has still only been a handful of times where I felt like I did something with the controllers that I definitely wouldn't have been able to be capable of on the Quest 2. So yes, if I really had to nitpick, the tracking is not quite as flawless as Lighthouse's, and for something like Social VR, I guess I could see some issues cropping up there. But for the vast majority of regular gameplay, this is going to do fine.
As for the controllers themselves, I love these. Like, I really love these. If I could trade my Knuckles controllers for Lighthouse versions of these to use with my 8KX, oh, I would do it without any hesitation. I hate these things so much. In fact, if the Vive ones had a thumbstick and face buttons instead of that infernal trackpad, I might honestly use them over this. I'm looking for the first good excuse I can to ditch these damn things forever. But these controllers feel amazing, and honestly are my favorite part of the Quest 2. I am extremely glad to see that this form factor is becoming more commonplace in the industry, because it just works. They feel comfortable to hold, and the ergonomics are pretty stellar. Every button is easy to reach, and the thumbstick is well placed. However, if I were to level 2 criticisms, firstly, I'll admit these controllers are on the smaller end for bigger hands and people, which is why I got these Kiwi grips to make the controllers larger. You can see there's quite a bit of a difference here. They feel a lot better to hold with this thing. I'd love to see these controllers become the standard, but just make them a little bit bigger. It's not unusably bad or super uncomfortable, but definitely not ideal. The other one, and what I will give credit for the Knuckles for, is this strap is very nice because you can just let go of the controller. If I do that here, this thing's just going to fall. And it's a lot more comfortable just in immersive to be able to just let go of your controller sometimes. But I am done being positive now, because, oh boy, this is where I have to start completely dragging the Quest 2, and what I have been holding myself back for. The visual experience on the Quest 2 was lackluster at best, and save for the cases where I had no choice but to use it, like with the RE4 port, I did not enjoy a single minute of it compared to damn near every other headset I have tried. The field of view on this is truly terrible. People talk about toilet paper roll FoV on VR headsets, but man,
The Quest 2 really takes it. According to recent 2000s HMD database, link in the description, that tells what a headset itself reports for the rendered FOV, thus shows the physical limits without any marketing smoke and mirrors. The Quest 2 has a horizontal FOV of 104 and 98 vertical. Which doesn't sound bad, right? Well, you don't get anywhere near that in practice. I got an absolutely awful 88 vertical FOV and 86 horizontal. This is disgusting. However, I will note that some people have said the widest IPD setting, which I need to use, results in lower FOV due to the single fixed panel design. To test this, I set my IPD to the second notch, which, trust me, is not correct for my eyes since they started getting strained very shortly after I did that. I was able to get a slightly more respectable 94 vertical and 96 horizontal, which seems to be in line with what most people are reporting on the Quest 2, give or take a little. Either way, that's pathetic. That's even smaller than the potato FOV mode for my 8KX review here. The only headset I've tried which had a similar feeling was the Reverb G2. FOV is a big thing for me, but while I don't need the 160 degrees Pimax offers to have a good time, the FOV on this is so absurdly small that is awfully immersion breaking and kills my fun after having tried so many others which have even somewhat more. Even the index is sizably above the Quest 2's FOV.
But honestly though, to briefly be a little bit positive, the Quest 2 lenses, these things are actually really good, and a good portion of that is in the sweet spot, or at least usable. But the raw field of view is so tiny that it barely matters to me, because if I want to look at almost anything, I need to turn around and find it. Yes, the 3D effect is nice and accurate due to the almost complete stereo overlap with the single panel design. But again, I just cannot get past how limited my vision feels. The colors too. Colors feel not awful for a VR headset, but they feel lacking compared to some better options like the Vive Pro 2, G2, properly tuned 8KX, and especially OLED panels. Furthermore, some people may have issues with the IPD since there's only 3 fixed adjustment points here. And this is versus the standard slider that most people have. These correspond to 58, 63, and 68 millimeters. But you can sort of force it to stop halfway if you really need to adjust that. But compared to the more expensive options, yeah, it is lackluster, though thankfully it should at least cover most people fine. The clarity issues get worse with respect to PCVR, however. Remember when I said I'd come back to the visuals on the clarity section here? Yeah, well, I'm going to do that now. See, due to the limited bandwidth of the Quest 2, the image has to be compressed when playing over wired or wireless. Yes, you can play wired on the Quest 2, but it doesn't have that direct DisplayPort connection versus the majority of headsets only via USB, which means even doing that, you're still going to have to deal with compression. Unfortunately, due to YouTube compression, I'm not sure how well I can illustrate this point, as it might make it worse than it actually is, so I'll be brief, and I'm mostly going to discuss the wireless.
You know how when you're watching a YouTube video and during dark scenes in particular, stuff starts looking off or kind of artifacting? Well, that's the best way I can describe it. Sometimes it's actually pretty impressive how little compression is there, and even with side-by-side A and Bing, you might have to really pixel peep to see a noticeable difference. But other times it certainly stands out. My 8KX and Quest 2 have pretty similar pixel density, but even aside from the colors, the 8KX often looks better due to the direct DisplayPort connection, sometimes a lot better. At its worst, the compression is bad enough that the clarity honestly didn't feel that much better than my memories of the index, despite how that has a sizably lower PPD. Though I will admit that is a rare feeling that only cropped up maybe once or twice, but it does feel like the panel is being fully utilized to its potential. And I have a decent dedicated Wi-Fi 6 router that's got a physical Ethernet connection to my PC, with nothing else really connected to it. My local connection is good, so this isn't just me having bad equipment or something. especially because I did try it with a wired connection, and yes, it didn't improve, but it didn't significantly change. And no, getting a Wi-Fi 6E router will not help because the Quest 2 itself limited by Wi-Fi 6 and your GPU encoder. And I've even played around with a debug tool to increase the bitrate to higher than you're technically supposed to be able to. If you don't have a dedicated router or got a bunch of devices clogging up your local network, results are liable to definitely be worse on wireless. Yes, using a wired connection is an option, and that will make things much better on image quality and latency in those situations if you do not have the right gear for a wireless setup. But in that case, you're losing out on one of the best features the Quest 2 has over other headsets. So if you don't already have those things, that's an extra cost you need to factor in for wireless.
Now, how about the audio? Well, there's two parts to this. Firstly, we have the microphone. Let's do a quick comparison. Testing the Oculus Quest 2 microphone quality. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is an audio sample of the Pimax AKX microphone. Testing 1, 2, 3.
This is a sample of my Blue Yeti microphone audio quality. Testing 1, 2, 3.
So, there you go. Alright, not great, not bad. However, on the speakers, I don't have a lot of good things to say here. But it's not all negative. The Quest 2... Where'd I put this thing? Oh, here. By default, uses some completely open things right here. It's completely open, no headphones or anything. And to its credit, it actually gives a pretty good feeling of space and sense of where the audio is coming from. But the stock audio quality itself is terrible! Second worst I have used on any headset. Only a little ahead of the Pimax standard modular audio strap solution. And this thing is not even close to the audio quality of like every other standard solution, such as like the Vive DAS, the KDMOS, everything else. And it's a world apart from the industry-leading G2 and Index. Furthermore, if you turn the volume up on this, you are going to bother literally every single person you play with in multiplayer. Because of the open design, the microphone will constantly pick up feedback from the audio speakers at higher levels, and will give a constant echoing of what the Quest 2 player is hearing. I hate that, and it's such a source of frustration in multiplayer lobbies when I can clearly identify somebody is playing on a Quest 2 because of this. At lower levels, it's actually not that bad. But if you do that, then the audio itself sounds quite on the quiet end. But if you turn it up, well, you get constant hot miking and online without using some headphones. And thankfully, the Quest 2 does have a 3.5mm audio jack here, so you can use your own solution if you want. Though, I do have to note that I adore the volume button on the underside here. I wish more headsets had that feature to adjust the volume up and down as you're playing. But hey, for $400, you gotta expect some compromises, and pretty decent for the price, right? Yeah, so about that, this makes the perfect transition to my other main critique. The comfort and price, or rather kind of deceptive price when you compare it to its competitors. Because, trust me, they are very closely tied together. See, the Quest 2 is the most popular VR headset around. By far. Not even a close competition going by Steam VR numbers. And with that has come an absolutely thriving market of accessories for pretty much everything you can imagine. Many of which can fix some of these shortcomings the Quest 2 has. Gaskets, head straps, controller grips, controller weights, battery packs, pistol grips, you name it. There's a Quest 2 accessory for it. And there is a good reason for that, because you want to know what the Quest 2 comes with for its default head strap.
What the hell is even that?
This terrible abomination! I hate this thing. Everyone in my family who's tried it hates it too. It is not the most uncomfortable setup I've ever used, but it is damn close. It is a simple cloth strap that you just pull on the sides here just to fit your head and then adjust the top strap. It puts all the weight on the front half of the Quest 2, so it is extremely front heavy when you're wearing it. Facebook cut every corner they could to make this as cheap as possible, and the head strap suffered for it. And the default face gasket too. Terrible. It was definitely too small for my big head to comfortably rest against. But Getting a replacement for those, it improved the experience by such an insane degree that I would actually go as far to say the Quest 2 went from one of the most uncomfortable headsets I've ever used to the most comfortable one, with another gasket and the Vive Deluxe audio strap here. If still getting a little bit toasty sometimes. And this is where the rather deceptive price comes in. Yes, you do not technically require these accessories to function. So if you really want to or can grin and bear it, you can disregard this next section. But I wouldn't. Other competitors have things like better straps as a default, and the experience is improved by such a drastic degree that I would consider it borderline mandatory to at least buy a replacement head strap. And if you have a giant head, add a face gasket if you don't want to feel like someone stuck your face in a hydraulic press. And if you don't have a router but want wireless, well, you very strongly want to get one. Want to save some money and get a cable instead? Pay up because it doesn't include it. Oh, you want to play for more than 2 hours in one session and you aren't playing on wired? Buy a power bank or head strap with one too, since the battery life on this is 2 hours and it sucks. And sure, on their own, these accessories actually aren't too expensive if you go for some of the more budget options. And my criticism of the router does apply to other wireless HMDs as well. But the thing is, it rapidly adds up as with every little bit, and is a very easy rabbit hole to start going down without realizing. I got very, very lucky on my accessories, and got all of them well below the going rates because of sales or secondhand market. But if you're buying these things new for a wireless setup, let's look at how quickly that cheap $400 price tag balloons with the very strongly recommended accessories, using current prices on Amazon and going for the cheapest that I know get the job done. And let's also be charitable and assume you have a router already. If you don't, add like $600 to that title. That cost. Cheap head strap to make it comfort tolerable, $20 to $30. Decent sized power bank if you don't have a head strap with extra battery so you can play for longer than 2 hours, $20 to $30. Or a head strap with built-in battery is going to run you as much as those combined or even a bit more. Replacement face gasket to support bigger faces and or PU leather. And that's not even counting a router if you lack one too. And the cost of the cable or tax. And yes, there are even more out there, but past that, I would consider accessories far less needed, and I think it'd be unfair to include them on a value comparison. But there are still options if you want to improve certain things, like the headphones or my Kiwi grip, since the controllers were a bit small for my hands. That's another $30 right there if you go that route. Or go for the costlier head straps, like the Vive Deluxe audio strap. You could argue the gasket, based on face shape, but the head strap is not up for debate. I will not have it. So now, again, why are these prices notable? Well, that's because other options don't need these. Look for example the Pico models. Both come with a more industry standard and comfier looking stock strap, while also having a larger capacity battery built into the back, which not only helps with the balance, the Quest 2 is rather front heavy because of the default strap, but gets around 2.5 to 3 hours of battery life, which, yes, that is not a lot over the Quest 2. But 3 hours of VR is probably a decent length for a chunk of people, and the head strap itself is far better. The Pico Neo 3 Link also includes a DisplayPort cable with it. So in that case, you don't even need to buy a cable. And the QLED version of the Pimax Portal has a more standard head strap that includes a 6,000 milliamp whatever battery in the head strap, not even counting the device's own internal battery life of 4,000, which is just barely larger than the Quest 2's at 3,640, though smaller than the Pico's 5,300. But almost double the capacity of it, factoring in the head strap battery. And I want to stress this again. While you do not require these accessories, and you can skip them if you want, they are such an insane improvement, I would recommend at least the head strap and battery to almost everyone. And so I think they should be factored into the comparison, especially because the other competitors include that stuff. I know 2 people who had the Quest 2 go from literally unusable to suddenly loving it with another head strap. When you start to factor in these optional accessories, the Quest 2's price suddenly gets a lot closer to even higher than some of the options in the price class that also offer wireless. But does that make these options better than the Quest 2? Well, unfortunately, I have not personally tried either, so I have to rely on others' impressions and any of my own research I've done. So I'll let you draw your own conclusions from some information. On the Pimax front, it's really hard to say. The on-paper specs are amazing, best of the bunch, and loads vary between things like the higher PPD, QLED, and local dimming if you go for that model, and ability to function as a mobile gaming device. Sure. But it's not out and so is unproven. Plus, Pimax has a tendency to overpromise and can take a while to deliver. Could be amazing and blow the Quest 2 away if all the on-paper specs pan out. But it could also end up being underdelivered, underbaked, take a while to get most of those features working right, and not be a good VR experience. I can't say buy it instead due to this, but maybe keep an eye on it and see where things go if you're considering the Quest 2. As for the Pico, well, on the hardware end, I think it honestly does look better than the Quest 2, and impressions have generally been pretty positive. The lack of needing to buy other head straps is nice if you're on a budget, plus the Pico 3 Neo 3 Link has the direct DisplayPort connection, while the Pico 4 has those beautiful pancake lenses everyone's losing their mind over, and along with a decent FoV bump. Though the Pico 4 lacks 3.5mm audio jack. However, again, personally haven't tried them, so can't definitively say if I prefer them to the Quest 2 without rigorous testing and comparisons. But on paper, I think they look compelling enough that if you are in a country where both are available, you should do some digging into the Pico or consider trying both if you have the means for that. However, one gigantic asterisk that I have to put on the Pico devices, and the big reason why I wouldn't buy them, is that if you don't like the Quest 2 or the company behind it, due to the many concerns and scandals people have had with it with respect to privacy, and times Facebook has been caught doing some questionable things, I don't think you're going to want to go with the Pico, because the company behind them, ByteDance, has things to be concerned about, given who it is tied to. Some would say are even worse, and I'm going to leave it at that. But one key thing both of those options lack are the exclusives that the Quest 2 has, such as RE4 or the coming GTA San Andreas. And that is something I don't foresee changing in the near future either. Also, as a brief aside, if wireless is not your ride or die, the only other real non-used option in this price range is the cabled Reverb G2, which does have a decently sharper optics, granted, but comparable FOV and only 90 Hz. Although it does have a vastly better stock strap and industry-leading audio to its credit. I like to give all my own opinions on things, but I also like to try and present enough for people to make some of their own conclusions, since not everything has the same weight for each person, and when it comes to VR in particular, there are a lot of different opinions and values. Some like clarity above all else, some like FOV, and some are wireless or deaf. But that all said, would I still recommend somebody consider this thing who's also a VR enthusiast and has a high budget, like say $1,200 or more, especially if you are buying it mainly for PCVR. No, holy hell no. Not even with a bunch of mods like the Vive DAS back there. This thing has just been sitting collecting dust until I pulled it out for this video. I think I'm going to probably even be selling it too, as I've got another relative in the house who's got a Quest 2 that they use infrequently enough. I can just borrow that for a hardware comparison or videos. If you must have wireless, but have a high enough budget that you are not concerned too much on value, then there are other high-end options which have far less compromises or better features, either out now or coming in the near-ish future. Though I will admit that does require some patience, but obviously these do have a weaker value proposition than the Quest 2 does. I would love to have a wireless version of my 8KX and get rid of this damn cable. I've hit this thing several times due to how low my ceiling is. I've even given up some of the FOV for it, and you know how much importance I placed on that earlier. But I am not part of the wireless cult, as I find current wireless solutions are far too limited, expensive for what they provide versus a cable, or shackled to devices where I find the other areas far too lacking, and I'm not willing to make those sacrifices yet. The Quest 2, however, does have a place in the market, but it is not 2020 and this isn't $300 anymore. There are more options to consider for more than just the budget segment, and if it's the best budget option, it's going to depend on what you value the most. And those are my thoughts on the Quest 2. What'd you think? Do you still think it is the best budget option? Still better than the others? Much more expensive options? Or is it lacking compared to the competition now? Let me know what you think in the comments if you like the video. If you stick around, until next time, and if not, thanks for dropping by. Later.